A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back to Films I'm Willing to Talk About Again. And so, what I might as well do in order to finish off this week's worth of stuff relating to films I'm willing to talk about again is another Thomas and Friends related film. How about? I feel like that there are lots of other movies that I could cover, like Universal-wise or Disney-wise or anything like that, but you know what? Before I do anything like that, why don't we go ahead and talk a bit about Thomas and Friends Hero of the Rails. Released in 2009, this was the first ever piece that had been put together by Hit Entertainment, basically making the full transition from models to CGI. And it was a bit of a cursed precursor with season 12, but basically up until 2007 and 2008, this was pretty much the very end of a certain era for Thomas and Friends, which lived on to be one of the best known types of TV shows ever to be made using scale models as well as entire train sets with loads of scenery and a ton of noteworthy characters and soundtracks. However, in the case of Thomas and Friends Hero of the Rails, being that this was another product that had Michael Brandon be the voice of the narrator, much like how he had been, especially between seasons 7 and 12, up until this very point, it would still be some time before he himself would retire from Thomas and Friends, which came around in 2012, by the time that Blue Mountain Mystery came to be. But that's probably something for another day. In any case though, Hero of the Rails was my first ever experience with Thomas and Friends in the basis of CGI when it came around to that very point in history, after they decided to make the full move from models. Yeah. So by any means, my expectations to this were actually not very low, in contrast to other things, because some people have been talking a lot of crap and negativity about such movies like Calling All Engines and The Great Discovery, albeit there was also The Magic Railroad, which I had already touched up on. Maybe someday I could probably talk a bit more about Calling All Engines and The Great Discovery, as I had seen those as well. In any case though, Hero of the Rails was actually something that I did not see coming. I mean, this was much different than what we'd seen in Thomas and Friends related stuff. It does give us the same old feel as we had recognized, bringing us to the island of Sodor, a supposed magical place with talking trains. Yeah, I guess you can't really get any more descriptive than that. In any case though, the movie opens itself up, bringing us to the world of Thomas and Friends, introducing us to the many characters, and even giving us a first-hand look at the fresh new animations that they were bringing us. Not only were the trains animated, but also the human characters, including the one and only Fat Controller, otherwise known as Sir Topham Hatt. And of course, we can't forget to mention that unlike with the show itself, plus some of the other movies that I had previously mentioned, apart from Magic Railroad, this Thomas and Friends movie was in fact a movie that had itself a full cast. So not just the narrator himself, which, like I said, was Michael Brandon's work. The cast does also include members in there, including various members that come from the American as well as the English versions. So in the case of various members, you have yourself David Videla, Jules DeJohn, Teresa Gallagher, William Hope, Togo Igawa, Carrie Shale, and many others. So it's not like at all like we remember from the series, where the narrator was solely doing all the voice acting for the characters and whatnot. You have a full cast performing the likes of the characters, with up to 13 members in total to work with, including the narrator. That certainly is a good sign of higher production value. Anyways though, I feel like I've been dilly-dallying with the details too much though. The main plot of the movie does involve Thomas the Tank Engine himself being challenged against the likes of Spencer, the big, silver, fast engine, whom had already whizzed by everybody else. Supposedly, his main intentions for the day were to in fact be of assistance to the Duke and Duchess. And as you probably remember, Spencer is indeed well known for his travels with the Duke and Duchess. And they are in fact high priority individuals who ride along the Northwestern Railway, or NWR for short, which is in fact Sir Topham Hatt's own railway on the island of Sodor. In any case though, Spencer's main job and his so-called importance does allow some others to believe that he certainly is acting way too well for his own good, way too important to possibly be doing anything of this sort. They do present a challenge. Spencer and Thomas haul large loads of freight up and over Gordon's Hill. And when the day finally comes and it takes place, Thomas himself does seem like he's winning, and Spencer seems like he's winning. Thomas struggles up the hill because compared to Spencer's impressive build as a Mallard or upside down bathtub engine, Thomas being an LB SCR E2 class tank engine, not necessarily any more powerful. In fact, he could barely haul a full load of freight cars himself, or trucks as they're called in the United Kingdom. However, he does make it over the top. However, things go very wrong for him. He quickly becomes a runaway train after his system starts malfunctioning. He unfortunately cannot stop himself. The weight of the cars behind him do continue to shove him down further and even faster. Eventually, Thomas ends up veering off a siding into a certain unexplored area of the island of Sodor, a place that had apparently been abandoned for a while. Thankfully, with all the vegetation and foliage in the way, Thomas is able to stop himself. But there's a certain somebody who happens to have heard the noise and ends up calling hello. Thomas basically hears it and basically moves forward. What he sees is a certain engine in front of him, who must have been sitting there for a long time. The engine himself is known by the name of Hiro. He comes from a certain railway in Japan, and had come to the island of Sodor, being the first ever engine to have ridden across the Northwestern Railway on Sodor itself. Supposedly, the reason why he ended up there was because parts of his were needed to get him fixed up. But since nothing had happened, he was just left there in that siding, in those woods, the whole time. Years, even decades could have passed, up until the point where Thomas had finally discovered him. Accidentally, so to speak. So Thomas and Hiro do exchange a few words. Eventually, Thomas had to make his reverse move to get back as soon as he can. Even though his system had malfunctioned, he was still able to get back pretty much intact. Eventually having to go to the Sodor Steamworks, where his friends Victor and Kevin do seem to get into a bit of arguments. Of course, Sir Topham Hatt does come around one night to let Thomas know that he is not to do any more of that stuff ever again. And as for everybody else at Hidden Sheds, well, he is going to have everybody start off pretty early and wants everybody to be in tip-top shape, not have any broken engines. This, of course, does dissuade Thomas into, well, not wanting to talk about Hiro to the others, knowing that Hiro was supposedly a broken engine. And, well, obviously we know that one of Thomas's main jobs is hauling passengers with Annie and Clarabelle, his two coaches, while Percy, one of his best friends on the island, is mainly responsible for carrying the mail. And, well, business does go off as usual. As time goes by, though, Thomas would eventually flutter back and forth between his work as well as spending some time with Hiro. Not only getting to know about history with him, but also having a lot of hope and faith in his hands to restore Hiro to his former glory and get him back out on the rails again after all these years that have passed. Eventually, it does lead to a certain plan taking place, as eventually word gets out about Hero to some of the other engines, including James, Gordon, and Percy. Eventually, some parts are in fact taken out of the Sodor Steamworks, as well as other sources, and are sent directly to Hero himself, where workmen were able to get him fixed up in a certain way. And while his rebuild was a bit crude by today's standards, it was thankfully enough to get him up and running. They likely would have him made fully repaired and restored to his former glory at the Steamworks itself. Because at the time they apparently believed that what Sir Topham had taught them that one night, no broken engines were necessary. Thomas, of course, felt discouraged at the time about letting any word about Hero out to his other friends, because he was a bit concerned. What if Sir Topham did have plans to send broken engines to the scrapyard, not knowing that Hero was left there for a long time and had no idea that he was in this state? Well, of course we do know the bitter truth after some time has passed. Hero, of course, is in fact able to get up and running after some notions had come around, some cars were left behind, and some business with Sir Topham eventually led Thomas to initiate the plan to have Hero moved out of his hiding spot, especially since Spencer was also on their tail. And well, it eventually came to be that Spencer would run alongside them and see Hero out in the open. Well, while Spencer himself eventually backs off, Hero, of course, doesn't end up in good shape. In fact, all the parts he's fitted with, like I've said, it was a crude fit, and as a result, it was basically like a beat-up car, ready to break down. And when it came to be, a majority of Hero's parts would in fact shear off and allow him to once again be stranded. This time out on the main line. Thankfully, Gordon is able to get up alongside Spencer and encourage him to race him to get away from Hero. And while Spencer does leak out the details of Hero, it's basically treated like silly gibberish at first by Sir Topham as well as the Duke and Duchess, who were already kind of annoyed that Spencer brought him in late. Eventually, though, Sir Topham and Thomas do have a bit of an exchange. Thomas does confess to him that Hero was a broken engine that he had discovered some time ago, and had hoped to avoid having Sir Topham sent to the scrapyard, because Hero did not need to be sent there. He needed to be fixed up, and likely sent back home after many years had passed. Of course, Sir Topham at first does seem like he would be negative about the decision. Turns out that he actually has some history with Hero. Hero was in fact dubbed the Master of the Railway. And so, Sir Topham actually did have different plans for Hero all along. Upon realizing that Thomas had found him, he hoped to actually fix up Hero rather than send him to the smelter's yard. You know. So it came to be that Hero was actually going to be saved rather than scrapped. By the next morning, Hero would come out as good as new in a nice black, red, and gold color scheme with the number 51. Of course, it is more than worthy to know that Hero himself is voiced by a real Japanese voice actor known as Togo Igawa, which is especially a nice touch. Being a Japanese locomotive, and a pretty old one, it did make sense to have a matching personality to accompany the character himself. From then on out, Hero would in fact be sent back home to Japan. However, this would not be the end of the character's story within the franchise, as in season 13, as well as a few more seasons would come around, Hero would actually maintain his role as a character within the Thomas and Friends franchise. Because even though he went back to Japan, he eventually would come back after some time. And so, that right there is a nice movie. A nice way to kick off a new generation of Thomas and Friends, but some people would probably disagree in certain ways. However, in my case, I did enjoy the film in many ways. Even my recent revisiting of it still does hold up quite well. Not many people have that many good things to say about TNF anymore. But sometimes when you look back, you can see there's a lot of potential, even with CGI. So in that sense, I give this movie a good 7.4 out of 10.1. And I feel like that's going to cover for this week. So I'll see you guys again with more material.
Whenever I want, I usually get, and I'm thinking I want you, but I don't have you yet. I ain't got no tricks to be playing on you.